Dr. King warned, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So tomorrow is today, yesterday is today, and here we are trying to make our way as a community of love and justice and demonstrate what capacities we can to fulfill the dream. I thought the best way to honor Dr. King, you all know the story, I don't need to run you through it again, would be to ask you to think, what is justice? We toss the term around blithely as though we know what we're talking about. So if you would, let me take you on a very brief excursion into theories of justice. Most people, if you ask them, will say it has something to do with people getting their fair share, getting what they deserve in the distribution of goods and services, reward and punishment. But let's go deeper than that. I mean, how do you determine what anyone deserves? Well, here are some theories to consider. The first one you're going to recognize, it's called the rule of retaliation or reciprocal justice. It has its origins broadly, but particularly for us in the Hebrew Bible, in Exodus, where it says, if there be serious injury, you are to take a life for a life and an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. This is the law of the playground. He hit me, so I hit him back. And he hit me back, and I hit him back again. One of my professors said the trouble with an eye for an eye sense of justice is it just leaves us with a bunch of blind people. I do find it interesting. It's the only biblical adage the former president was able to even make reference to when he said he loves the Bible. The second notion is justice as divine law, the rule of God. Now that sounds wonderful. We're gonna align ourselves with the law of God, but wait a minute. Who knows what's God's law and how? And what do we do if your God's is different than my God? And of course, there is the dilemma, is what is morally good and just commanded by God, or because it is morally, or is it morally good simply because it is commanded by God? That one doesn't really help us too much. It kind of keeps knocking the goal line further back as to what in the world are we talking about? There's another one that I'm sure you will recognize called the rule of gold. Justice is whatever serves the interests of the powerful, the interests of the strong. Those who have the gold, those who pay the piper call the tune. They make the rules. It's a version of what we hear as kids, because I said so. There are many who, in my growing up years, said we have the best government money can buy. And I didn't realize at the time they were making a sarcastic remark about this rule, that if you have the money, you get to make the law. Well, we can see the problems with that. A fourth one, the rule of nature. Now, this one kind of appeals, that there is something in us, something innate about our very being as humans, that we know what's right and what's wrong, what's fair and what's not fair. It's just in the nature of things. And we're probably hard pressed to say, well, just what that is, but we know it when we don't have it. So as a way of teaching negatively, the rule of nature might be helpful. But again, if we say it violates the natural order of things, who determines what's natural? Again, I suspect it's whoever calls the tune, whoever has the most power is the one that makes that decision. A more commonplace notion of justice is called the rule of exchange. Justice is whatever you and I mutually agree to. It's the foundation of contract law. You make a promise, I make a promise, we work together, and as long as both of us fulfill our end of the deal, it's just. But we can quickly recognize that I can make a pact with somebody that is good for both of us, but is actively harmful for others. climate crisis is an illustration of that, as everybody defends their right to be able to exchange goods the way they want to do so, and no busybody's going to tell them that it's going to hurt the climate. It's also the argument you hear every day now about masks and vaccination. Is that my right to decide how I want to conduct my life as a matter between me and my doctor? And there's no such thing as the common good that you can enforce me to subscribe to. And so exchange justice, the rule of exchange, is only helpful in the small enterprise of conversation. It does not help us formulate any kind of spiritual notion of justice. The next is called the rule of fairness and liberty. This one we hear invoked all the time. Imagine, if you will, two kids with a cake, a cupcake of some sort. Call it a big cupcake. And they're going to divide that cake up. What is the fairest way to divide the cake? The rule simply is whoever cuts the cake gets the last choice. And that sort of ensures a certain amount of fairness, that both pieces will be roughly the same. It makes equality the issue in justice. As long as we have an equal distribution of goods and services, reward and punishment, then things are fair. Just as long as everybody gets what they want without destroying everyone else. Well, that kind of makes some sense, doesn't it? Indeed, there's a formal expression of it that says, justice is each person having an equal right to the most extensive total system of equal basic liberties compatible with the system of liberty for all. That's quite a mouthful. The core idea here is what we find in the phrase due process. That whatever the dispute is, whatever the issue we're trying to create justice about, is that there is a way of adjudicating that, of working that out, that allows everyone a fair opportunity to be engaged. We prefer this. When we talk about the rule of law, not the rule of men or women, we don't want law to be premised on the whim of my personality. We want something called due process that will ensure the maximization of liberty for you and me and for everybody else, and see to it that we get what we want and need. Well, the religious world finds that still inadequate. But it just doesn't capture all the ways people get around due process, or we can't agree on what's fair. And so the religious world across the world has come up with the rule of compassion. And action is just to the extent that we all benefit thereby. If an eye for an eye illustrates what I call the brass rule, do it to them before they do it to you. The golden rule asserts that justice occurs when we do unto others as they would be done unto. Common, worldwide, well-known teaching. However, wait a moment. This rule assumes I know what you need, that I know what you want to have done unto you, and therefore I am motivated to do that. Well, that assumes a great deal of my knowledge about you, but it still keeps the power of justice in my hand, not in our hand. For example, back to my illustration, what if I don't like cake? You could give me an equal sized piece of cake, but what if I want pie? It's a simple and almost trite illustration, but it gets to the point we don't really know what each other needs. And so the rule, however kindly motivated it is still somewhat presumptuous. So this has led some wags, some scholars to come up with what I call the platinum rule. Do unto others as they would be done unto. This suggests that justice has an obligation on my part to know what matters to you and to do what I can to see that you get what matters to you, and vice versa. The platinum rule insists that we respect the diversity of human beings and our varying needs and desires. And to the extent we don't respect that, we are behaving in an unjust fashion. One last item for your consideration. Call it the rule of equity. Justice in this thinking is more than just equal treatment or equal opportunity. It recognizes that justice can have many means to a desirable outcome for us all, and those means need not be the same. We're not all the same. Our abilities differ. Our needs vary widely. We can recognize immediately that Leah prefers cake, but Simone goes for pie, and say, all right, well, let's figure out how to get each other the cake and the pie that they want. Some employees might prefer a bigger paycheck, and still others might prefer to be able to work at home or have more vacation. What is the just distribution of goods and services with those variabilities? We believe that many can and probably should vote in person. That's one of our debates right now. But there are others who cannot get to a polling place for a variety of reasons and need to be able to vote via drop box or absentee. And to the extent you constrain that opportunity, that means to an end, you are creating an unjust situation. So equity justice is for fairness, to be sure, but it's also to look for universal outcomes that we all can find satisfying. Here's a simple way to keep this in mind. Imagine, if you will, 3 kids, and they've gone down to the local AAA ball field, and they want to watch the ball game. Now, one is 13, the other's 9, and the third is 6. Well, equality would say they should all stand at the fence and look over. Well, that might be fine for the 12-year-old whose head is above the fence, but the 9-year-old and the 6-year-old need something else. So we give one box to stand on for the middle child, and now that child can see over the fence. It's unequal treatment with equal result. And the third child, well, we give that child 2 boxes, and that child stands on top of 2 boxes. And now all 3 children can enjoy the game, and that we would call justice. But the means to get there was not equal. This is and on one hand, a very easy idea, but very difficult. My brother and I were having a conversation in which he was complaining about the New York City wanting to distribute vaccines and tests to minorities more so than to the population at large. And he thought that was unfair and unjust. And I said, well, I have some reservations with the policy myself, but I remember learning years ago about how you can give the same test to one group of people and get a certain set of outcome for hiring, for example. And you could choose anybody who scored above a certain score as likely to succeed in the job. And you could give that same test to someone else who comes from different social conditions where the scoring is lower on average, and you could pick a line that says above this line, we will hire people. And even though it's lower than the first line, you get equal outcome in terms of employment capacity. That just drives people nuts to think that that statistical analysis is fair, but it is. It gets the same result from the employer's point of view of people who can work on your behalf. So it's complicated stuff. The thing to remember here is that while the means are not the same, the outcome is, and that's justice. Now, since Theodore Parker, we Unitarian Universalists have been anchored our faith firmly in the cause of justice. We are justice lovers. We were the leaders in abolition and women's suffrage. We were co-founders of the American Civil Liberties Union. We were also participants in the founding of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. We were there at Selma. We were on the lead for gay marriage a few years ago. And today we Unitarian Universalists are working together on something called UU the Vote to help strengthen our democracy. The second principle of our faith declares we commit ourselves to affirm and to promote justice equity, and compassion in human relations. This is what we are called to do and we're called to be. We are people who stand on the side of love, who show up. We bend the moral arc ever so slightly. Injustice anywhere is a threat to injustice everywhere. And so we take our stand against injustice. We show up again and again as often as necessary. So, dear ones, keep Dr. King's warning in mind. Continue in ways large and small, always, always, to devote your life to a love of justice. Amen. I want to put this all now in the context of theology, give you something to think about in a very practical way. I want to reacquaint you with our core theology expressed so succinctly in our first principle that we are committed to the inherent worth, not the conditional worth, but the inherent worth and dignity of every person. That's a really tough teaching because so often we run into people whose worth we are tempted to question. But our faith says, we're universalists. We love everybody. Oh, well, that sounds so syrupy, but that's where we are. Historically, we are the love church. We are devoted to loving all of God's children of any color or station in life. We share Dr. King's dream belief that one day little girls and little boys will hold hands, singing and praying together, whether they're black or white, red, brown, or yellow. They will play together. They will pray together as children of one God and members of one same body, the human race. Unitarian Universalism is countercultural because we have a fundamental theological argument against the ruling theology of our day known as Calvinism. We don't really discuss very often the nature of human beings or the nature of God, but they are important questions for us to think about. Universalism preached salvation for everyone. And given that the world under Calvin's thinking was divided into two schools, basically, Calvin said God was all powerful and all knowing. So God created everything at the beginning and knew how it was going to work out. And God had chosen, in effect, those who would be saved and those who would be damned. And there was nothing you could do about it. Only a few were to be elected to grace. On all else were guaranteed eternal perdition. This teaching still prevails, I'm sad to say, among us. It's almost an official theology, laced deeply into our law and our notions of justice. And there are many who live it. They go about their lives resenting, despising the notion that as a society, we should care for the undeserving, whether they be the social outclass or the poor or the uneducated or the sick. They just resent that idea. We have, since the nation's founding, been a society of winners and losers. This fits right into Calvin's notion that justified by the idea that if you are well off, you are saved. There's the proof. And if you are poor, well, too bad. That's how God ordained it. You don't do well in this society because it was God's choice. Remember that rule of justice about God's law? You hear it here. You're not a real American. If you're a social minority, if you're an indigenous person in this society, you are by definition inferior. You have no dignity that we must respect and regard. You certainly have no right to be able to vote and to decide how this nation governs itself. This is the speech of modern Calvinism. And people who use it justify their positions of privilege as being among God's chosen, and all the rest are going to hell. This is so deeply assumed in our culture that justice arguments about fairness, efforts to redress inequality, claims that we should show respect for diversity fall on deaf ears. Of late, we have seen some among the powerful and the privileged giving license, out and out license to commit violence against those they deem less American, less deserving. This is where we as Unitarian Universalists are so odd with so much of our culture. Our faith teaches differently. Our faith teaches us a this worldly, universal salvation. We are all saved or none is. And as long as some suffer, we suffer. We have these bonds of connection. None are less deserving because we are all children of the divine. Desmond Tutu avowed, we are made for goodness, we are made for love, we are made for friendliness, we are made for togetherness, we are made for all things beautiful that you and I know. We are made to tell the world that there are no outsiders. All are welcome, black, white, red, yellow, rich, poor, educated, uneducated, male, female, gay, and straight. All. We belong to this family, this human family, God's family. So wrote Desmond Tutu. But you tell that to a modern subscriber of the prosperity gospel, the belief that your financial blessing and physical well-being are a gift of God. It's God's will for you to have them. And they will tell you that their riches are evidence that they are chosen by God. And if by chance you don't have good health, you don't have richness, if you're poor, well, that clearly indicates that you're not on God's side. Well, as I said, it's a semi-official theology. Merge Calvinism then with our binary politics, and you have the roots of our social malaise. One party believes all should be included, and one seems not to. The sense of fair dealing has been lost. Kindness is now for losers. Compassion is derided as catering to weakness. Nonviolence is a fool's errand. Is this not exactly what Donald Trump Jr. said last month to a gathering of evangelicals? He said, the Sermon on the Mount by Jesus is worthless. What has it gotten us? He asked. Nothing. So declared this empowered but sad man. I've long thought and preached that Unitarian Universalism is incredibly difficult. Not only are we outside of mainstream theology, we straddle surviving in its culture while abhorring its exploitive values. The free faith is incredibly challenging, difficult. It calls you not to be just countercultural, but countercultural. It says you should prize and work for love as a condition of justice, and that justice is possible because we can make love incarnate. Anything less ensures the ongoing war of each against all and the powerful against all others. Unless it is universal, justice is not just. This is the very idea of justice as love. Our faith affirms and calls us to be together, to be faithful, to love always and in all ways. So let us know our own power, good people. Let us know our privileged position. Give us the capacity to do something today, every day, to ease the burdens and the suffering of others. And it asks that we do that. Oh, we don't have to move mountains. That's not the issue, but we do have to show up. We have to speak up. We cannot be neutral in systems of unfairness, unkindness. There is no place for silence against injustice. We need to stand up. No sense for a misguided neutrality of we don't want to get involved in the tumult. We need to show up and testify against what is clearly wrong and hurtful. So today's takeaway, I like to give you homework, is this reminder of what you already know. You have the ability. So ask yourself over and again as you go about your days, what does love require of me today? In this situation, what would love do? The answer is often very clear, but often sometimes very challenging. It's not easy to love, particularly when you're dealing with and find yourself surrounded by hatred. So be of big heart, dear people. Be of big heart and have courage that you can step forward. You can bend the arc a little closer to do justice, because to not do so, to be hopeless, would be so unkind, so out of keeping with who we are. It dishonors all that has gone before us. Amen.